Welcome to All Home Care Matters, the show where we discuss all things home care, with discussions on important age-related matters and topics. Brought to you by Enriched Life Home Care Services, the #1 rated home care provider in Michigan by Top Rated Local.
Hello, and welcome to All Home Care Matters. If this is your first time visiting us here at the show, we want to say thank you. We appreciate how valuable everyone's time is, and that's why we try and make each episode here at All Home Care Matters something that will hopefully matter to you. Today, we are honored to welcome a remarkable guest, Ann Campanella. Ann is an author and a caregiver, as well as a manager and director at AlzAuthors. Ann is the author of the award-winning book, Motherhood, Lost and Found. Welcome, Ann.
Thank you so much, Lance. I'm happy to be here.
It's our pleasure, Ann. So let's start with your caregiving experience. You started to become a caregiver for your mom.
Yes, it was an out-of-the-blue experience. I can give you the background. My husband and I, we had just moved from Houston, Texas to Charlotte, North Carolina, where my parents lived in North Carolina, and we had wanted to get back to just in closer range to them because we knew they were aging. They were in pretty good health, but we also, my husband and I were in our early 30s, and we were ready to start a family. So we were thinking, well, we just really wanted my parents to be a part of that and just to kind of bring them along and join in with the family.
Sure.
And we moved my horse, who was a grandson of Secretariat, to North Carolina, and we built a barn because I was a newspaper and magazine editor and a horseback riding instructor. And when we moved, I did the horse stuff usually in the afternoon, and the writing and the editing, newspaper work in the morning. And so here we are, we're in North Carolina, things are going well. My husband's job is going well. He's busy, he's traveling, he's happy. I have all these things going on that feel really good. We think we have our world together. Everything is just humming along, and I get pregnant. And as I am in the midst of my first miscarriage, my mother begins showing signs of Alzheimer's. And at that point, little did I know, but I was at the threshold of becoming a caregiver. And I really had no idea what I was doing, but it was, I jumped in. I knew my mother needed help. And so I was just there for whatever that was, basically there for the duration.
When you said you were on the cusp of becoming that family caregiver for your mother, did your dad have any, how did that lead up to that point? Did your dad talk to you and share concerns he had, or was he not aware? Or
he knew some things were happening with my mom. He was mentally in good shape, but physically, he had knee problems, and he'd always had heart issues. And so physically he wasn't real healthy. But he did not come to me and say, "Oh, Ann, we're having some troubles. Come and help me take care of your mom." It was more like, "I've got it covered. Everything's okay. Mom's acting a little strange, but I could use your help just talking to her, but I'm okay. We're okay." So he kind of pushed me away.
He didn't want to concern you, probably, or?
I think he was just used to he was used to being the guy that took care of everything.
The fixer.
Yeah. And just, he didn't really want anybody necessarily in their business.
Sure. So once you started getting these, signs or clues that something was wrong with mom, when was it that it fully became, okay, something's definitely wrong and I need to get into caregiving and support mode for mom?
I probably saw things really kind of falling apart when I went with my parents on a trip to upstate New York, which was my mother's old home place. And we went there for, my mother had lost one of her brothers, and I drove my parents up to the funeral. And I just saw so many things going on with my mom. I mean, she could not remember anything. She was repeating questions to me. She did not even seem to be aware that her brother had died. So there were just so many red flags. And my father was, I could tell he was just tired. He was just, keeping on. But he wanted to get in the back seat and sleep. And so I just thought, this is not normal. And I still had no idea what to do about it. But I definitely knew Mom was not herself.
When you get back from that trip, did you go to a doctor, or what was like? Walk us through the process of getting that ultimate diagnosis.
We didn't go to a doctor immediately, but I kind of huddled with my siblings, and we did decide that was something we needed to do. I spoke with my other uncle, who happened to be a psychiatrist, and he said, you need to get her to the doctor. And we did eventually get her into Duke University, and they kept her there for about 3 weeks to do testing. And we were all very excited and thought, oh, this is going to be, a great, we're going to find how to fix this for Mom. But basically she had her testing, and at the end of it, it was like, okay, time to pack up and take her home. Although they said she can no longer be on her own. Somebody needs to be with her. And if your father can't do the caretaking, she needs to be, have a 24/7 caregiver or be in a care home.
What was Mom like prior to?
Prior to this, she was just the most wonderful mom. She was so sensitive and compassionate, so kind. She was the kind of person who, it was so easy to talk to her. I could tell her anything and never be judged. And one thing, just one memory of something that happened that made me know she was not herself. The first time I told her, Mom, I've lost the baby, she said, and she kind of snapped at me and said, maybe this will make you a more compassionate person. And this was just so unlike her. She normally would have just enfolded me in her mother love and her warmth. And this kind of anger that came out, I realized later, was probably her anger at the illness and not knowing what was happening. And it just sort of spurted out in any direction at whoever was there.
So when she gets back from Duke, what was the diagnosis? That she had dementia? Were they able to identify it?
They said it appeared that she had all the signs of Alzheimer's. And so that was a blow. But probably the bigger blow was they did not give us instructions, or there was no guide rail as to how do you handle this. It was, you need help, get a care home or caregivers, and just, you're done. We're done here. And so that's really probably when the biggest part of my caregiving journey began, because I just had to jump in all the way. And I could tell by that time my mom was suspicious of everything. She knew something was wrong. She felt worse after having been at Duke. In fact, she said, do I have to keep going back to those doctors who found, they always found something wrong with me? And she just felt so bad within herself. She knew she wasn't herself, and it was just so hard to see that.
Yeah. And I think you touched on something that so many families unfortunately experience when they do get that diagnosis. You're given a diagnosis, but you're not given much else other than that diagnosis. You're not told what to expect necessarily, how to handle different, situations. You know, and I know so many families that we encounter, they say, I got the diagnosis, but that's all I got. There's not even a prescription per se that will cure it, because as we know right now, there is no cure. They have medications that they're trying, and some of them are beneficial, some of them aren't, but none of them are a cure. They're just to help ease the process or the progression. And, so many families like you and your family are left just standing there. What do we do next? And I want to talk. Yeah. And so did you find that the caregiving came naturally? Because I can imagine, you're in your early 30s and, you just experienced your own personal, situation. You probably mentally and physically weren't prepared for what was to come.
I was not prepared at all, Lance, which I imagine most people are not.
Right.
But I was probably less prepared than many because I was so young, and none of my peers were experiencing dementia or caring for their parents. And so I had no community to go to and ask questions. And just, I was in a state where I was angry, I was sad, I was upset that my mom wasn't there for me. I wanted her to take care of me, and instead I was taking care of her. And it was just so painful. And yet at the same time, there was just this natural part of me that it's like, she's my mom. Of course I'm going to take care of her. She took care of me through, everything I'd ever been through. So I'm going to be there for her. But without the tools, it's so really, really difficult. And that's one of the reasons why I wrote my book, because when I was in that state, being a reader and a writer, I always look for books to guide me.
Right.
And there was very little available at that time. This was in the early 1990s. And I would stay up at, midnight after Mom, I'd finally gotten her to bed, and I'd be searching on my laptop for, just a book or a story that would tell the personal, really inside story of what was going on, because I wanted to know not just how people survived, but I wanted the story of how somebody accepted this and learned how to thrive. It was really important to me that my example of whatever I was doing with my mom somehow be a blessing or a guide for others. And so that was sort of the direction that I went.
So now your memoir, Motherhood, Lost and Found, is set on a horse farm.
Yes.
And you talk about Crimson and how he played into your caregiving. Crimson is the horse. How did Crimson the horse fit into this caregiving journey?
Crimson was kind of my solid rock who was always there. He was just this amazing horse with a huge heart. He was the kind of horse you could put any age child on, and he would take care of them. And I had him since he was 6, and I'd trained him to do dressage and hunter jumper, and he just was so willing to do anything. And so the days when Mom didn't know me, or she was angry and upset, or I was just, my heart was broken because I could tell that she was struggling so much, I would go down to the barn, and I could either just sort of lean against the fence and watch him grazing and just feel the peace emanating from him, And there were some days where as I was brushing him, I would just lean my head against his neck because I didn't even have words. I just felt so much pain. And he would literally absorb that pain with his body and his presence. And I don't know if you've heard, but horses have this amazing capacity to connect with humans. They
Right.
can even match their heartbeat to the rate of a human's heartbeat. And I just really felt that kind of thing was happening whenever I spent time with him. So it gave me some peace in the midst of this craziness I was living with.
How long were you caring for your mom?
Believe it or not, for 14 years.
Okay. And because, they say a person diagnosed with dementia / Alzheimer's, it could be anywhere from, 4 to 20 years that people are living with it. And ultimately, statistically, they say that you ultimately don't necessarily pass from the dementia, but you pass from a subsequent health issue that arises because of the dementia. For example, you hear about a senior citizen wandering outside in the middle of winter just wearing t-shirt and shorts and no shoes because they don't know any better and they can't tell that they're cold. When your mom was living with you, what did you find for you personally was the most challenging?
Goodness, she only lived with me for short periods of time, and I would visit her
Okay.
at my parents' house during this period of time. But the most difficult, I would say, she was so agitated, and trying to just calm her down. I can remember when I was, I'm in my 30s and I'm busy writing articles and things that I need to get out to the newspaper or the magazine. And she would just be roaming the house and opening drawers and looking in closets and pulling out silverware. And I could not get her to just sit. And the only way I could do it was, I'd lead her to the couch and have her sit beside me. And I'd say, Mom, can I read this to you? And because she was a reader and a writer, she'd say, oh, of course, dear. And so for that moment, she would just listen. And if I could get her to just be still for a moment, she might even fall asleep for 5 or 10 minutes. But then she'd be up again. And there was another time when she was just so anxious and she thought I had locked her in the house because I had locked the door because we lived out in the woods. And she somehow figured out how to unlock it. And she said, I am leaving this house and I'm going to see my brother who lives down the hill. And I'm like, her brother was in upstate New York and we're in North Carolina. And she starts going out the door and down the driveway. And it's thundering and lightning and a big storm is coming. It's starting to rain. And I finally just had to say, Mom, we'll go see your brother later. But right now he's busy. Let's come on back. And she was willing to do that. But it was like I had to constantly be on alert to one step ahead of her because she was on go all the time.
Right. Did you ever find, as the journey progressed, did your mom start to think you were her mother?
She never thought I was her mother, that I could tell, but she did think I was different people.
Different people, okay.
Yes, sometimes I might have been an aunt or a friend or when she went to a care home, I might have been one of the caregivers. And there was one day that I was actually on the phone with somebody at Duke. And because I had sort of turned on this very professional voice to talk to that person, she thought I was, I wasn't her daughter. And up until then, I had always been Anne. And I could tell she thought I was like some business person who had just...
Somebody in authority or something, yeah.
Yes.
We've found in our experiences, and I don't know about yours, that it seems more so with the mothers and daughters that the mothers, as the dementia progresses, they start to reverse the roles and they start to feel like the daughter is either a person of authority or they're not, they're the child and the daughters then become the mother. And for me, and I haven't, had to experience this yet personally, and I saw a lot of changes with my grandma, which was very difficult because, my grandparents lived down south, and I would spend a tremendous amount of time with them growing up and through early adulthood. And when my grandma became diagnosed, that was for me one of the hardest parts. Was now she no longer recognizes who I am or who the family is. And rightly or wrongly, to me, that almost signified the end of the journey, because once they no longer identify their loved ones, because as we know that they had the capacity for their long-term memory from, wanting to go see her brother. She remembers him, and wanting to go and think they're going back to their childhood home, and all of these childhood memories start to reverberate through their journey. And once they start to no longer identify their loved ones, at least for me and our family, that was one of the most difficult times, the most emotional, because now that it's almost like, even though the person's still there, that relationship isn't there any longer. Did you have that experience, Anne?
I did. Not exactly the same though, but when that happened, when she didn't recognize me, it was absolutely heartbreaking. And you do just have that sense that you've lost your connection to this person who is everything to you. But oddly, my mom she'd go for long periods of not being able to know who was who or anything. And then suddenly there would just be these moments. I can remember one visit in particular where I was probably coming to visit every month when she was in her care home. And she had been in really bad shape and had not remembered me for a long time. And it was Christmas time, and I was expecting the same old thing and just like dreading it. And I got there, and for some reason, it was just she and I in the room. And I connected with her, and I kind of looked into her face and said, "Hey, Mom, it's Anne. I'm here." And I could just tell, I can't remember her exact words, but it was something like, "Oh, hello, dear. I'm so glad you're back." And it was just, the old mom. And those moments, I lived for those moments.
Right. Yeah. And I think, just as a side note, the movie Notebook, right? I think they do a perfect job of capturing exactly what you're talking about. He would sit there, just wait for those moments. And, that was, even if it was one a week, it was enough, just to know that they're still there.
Yes.
So in the book, you talk a lot about Lake George in New York. It was your mother's family summer home. And towards the end, you speak about how you took your mom there for one final visit. Share with us what that last visit was like.
That was such an unexpected and special time. My mom was nearing the end of her journey. She still had a couple more years, but she was really not able to communicate well, not able to walk well. And when she got back to Lake George, it was as if all of the things that she remembered from her childhood just kind of infused her. She could smell the grass. She could look at the mountains that ringed the lake. She used to say that her feet knew the path through the woods to the old graveyard. And I just felt like she became alive again. And she was surrounded by cousins and family members who looked at her as a matriarch. And she just kind of stepped back into that role and was actually able to talk to people. And she even went for a canoe ride. She did things that I just thought she would never do again. So It was really special.
That's wonderful. And you mentioned that you had siblings. What was their impact or part in the caregiving for Mom? Were they close by where they could help out, or?
Yes, my sister actually lived close to where my parents were. Okay. And as siblings, we each just kind of took a portion of things, something that we were good at. And my sister was a nurse, and she was really wonderful at kind of keeping her eyes on mom's condition and her symptoms. Mom was in a care home near her for a while. And then at a certain point, she just needed a break. And she asked me, or I'm not sure how it came about, but I knew she needed a break, and we moved my mother close to us. And at that time, my brother and I lived close to Charlotte, and we both sort of took turns taking care of her. I did all the paperwork, and I, did lots of visits. And my brother was wonderful about just coming and spending time with her.
Good. Well, and I'm sure you'll agree with this, but you know how fortunate you were to have siblings that could help, because so often,
Yes.
Families, for one reason or another, there's usually just the one sibling that most of all of the caregiving and support falls on, even though they have, several siblings or even one sibling. So it's wonderful that, your family was able to come together like that to support your mom.
Absolutely. I feel like my mom planted those seeds because she always wanted us to be close. And we also have a brother who is in need of care, and he's mentally handicapped. So we've had to come together to care for him also. And if my mom had not developed Alzheimer's, we probably would not have all become as close as we are. But we had to communicate almost on a daily basis for a while. And that did bring us together.
Wonderful. How did Dad handle this experience and journey? Because I know you said he had some physical limitations. How was he enduring it?
My father was wonderful and exasperating and stubborn and just like a rock in many ways. I mean, I knew he was always there. He would do whatever he could, but he had limitations because we always said my mother was the emotional one and my father was the logical one. And he never fully understood why mom was acting the way she did. And so he couldn't quite get into her world, which is what she needed more than anything. And so that would just drive my mother crazy, and she'd get so angry with him. And I ended up having to be a traffic cop between the two of them. But no matter what, he was still there. And that was a huge, huge blessing for us.
Wonderful. So that leads me to my question. What made you or led you to feel compelled to write this book? I know you kind of touched on when you first started, you were searching and wanting to find information or any stories that could help you. And of course, that's in the early 90s. And we know there were not a lot of resources back then, and the internet wasn't as prevalent as it is today. And there wasn't organizations as wonderful as AlzAuthors either. So when did you sit down and say, was it before mom passed? Was it after, during some reflection? What compelled you to write the book?
It was actually during the process. I had always kept journals. And as mom was going through various stages of Alzheimer's, I just had to put this information on a journal so that I could separate from it because it was so emotional for me. And it was a way for me to kind of process it and figure out how to move forward. But my mom, I'm not sure if I said this before, she was a writer, and she was somebody who was a little bit ahead of her time, I felt. And she always believed in the importance of communication around difficult topics. She used to write about aging and retirement and menopause and topics that were not readily discussed. And she just believed that this is the only way people would learn, if we write about it and talk about it. And so I always had that sense in my head that if I came across something difficult, and as I was going through my series of miscarriages and losing my mom and realizing, wow, this is kind of a big thing. And I knew that Alzheimer's was not something that people talked about. And I thought, people aren't talking about it, but I know it's out there and almost every family is dealing with it. And so it just made sense to me to take my story, which felt like it might help somebody else, and put it into words. And being a newspaper person, I was used to writing other people's stories. And there was actually a day I can remember walking down to the barn, and it was just like a beautiful fall day. And my horse was out grazing, and I still had not had my daughter yet. And Mom was continuing to descend. And it was almost as if a voice said to me, write your story, get it out there. And so I just thought, okay, I'll do that.
Wonderful. I got to ask, because I'm looking at the cover of your book right here next to us, and we'll have a screenshot up for our viewers. Is that a picture of your horses on your farm?
It's not actually, but I was searching for a picture that would give the essence of
that
my
moment.
love of horses. But what was that?
I was gonna say, it almost sounds exact. The picture almost reflects the description of that day when you went down there and you felt to write the book.
It does. And I had a wonderful photographer friend. I actually found a photo on the internet, and my photographer friend was able to sort of shift it around to make it look like what I wanted it to look like. And I wanted the haze to be there as kind of representative of dementia and the fog that a family member might be going through.
Wonderful. So what kind of responses have you received from your book?
I've been so touched by, I've received letters, emails, phone calls. People have been in tears. So many people have said, while it might not have been their exact experience, it helped them either be prepared for the journey if they were in the beginning of it, or they felt comforted that they had gone through so many similar emotions. Because I really tried not to hold back. I wanted the whole story out there and to be very honest. My husband and I have had arguments during this time, and it was not always pretty, but there were beautiful moments in it. And I've been so honored to have over 100 reviews, and I've had, it's won multiple awards. And I was even surprised that it won an International Voices for Horses award, which I did not expect. So it was really heartwarming, and to think that my mother's story has gone around the world and touched so many people.
Well, and too, Anne, on the cover of the book, it's a winner of the best Alzheimer's books of all time. I mean, that's quite a designation for your book. And I think it just does a credit to, what you're trying to accomplish, is help these families so that when the next daughter or son or spouse gets that diagnosis, it won't be as difficult to find the resources or information like it was for you and so many other families. Because like you mentioned, Alzheimer's was around when you were going through it, and, whatever other forms of dementia. And I feel like, and even still to a point in current times, there's still a stigma attached to it, where, so many people, I feel like they think once they get that diagnosis, that person or their loved one, their life is over. There's nothing left to do. And I think there can't be anything further from the truth. We talk to people all the time where, their loved one started making beautiful paintings and all these crafts, and, there's so much they can still contribute. It's, see the person, not the disease.
Exactly. It really, probably the biggest stumbling block is expectations. You're in a phase of life and you expect a certain thing to happen. If you can let go of that and just step into what is happening now, I feel like I've learned so much just being around so many other people who have gone through this, of how to just, let it go and be with that person. And there's so many beautiful beautiful moments that occur.
And I know you just touched on it. Is there any other advice that you would want to share with viewers or listeners who, are maybe just starting out on this journey, or maybe even they're suspecting that their loved one may have dementia? They're not sure if it's just natural aging. What advice would you offer them?
Goodness. There's a few things. I would start by reading and learning. And I do it through reading memoir and other books. And I love the way memoir can teach people, because it's not in a hit you over the head with it, but it's through a story. And there's so many different aspects of the journey you can learn about through there. But there's also so many websites, and the Alzheimer's Association was very beneficial to me. They gave me a list of symptoms to look for and how to talk to somebody who had Alzheimer's. That was hugely helpful. And if you're going through it, probably the biggest, or one of the biggest tips I would say, is let yourself grieve. Grieve fully. And at the same token, once those tears have been dried, really allow yourself to feel in the present moment what the gifts are, because they will not be here forever. And if you let yourself grieve and feel, you'll also be open to the joy. And that just meant so much to me. I know the days that I really cried the hardest were also the days that I saw these jewels, and just moments with my mom that I will treasure forever.
When did you first discover AlzAuthors? Because you're now a director and a manager. How did that come about? Was it through the book, or through you just searching the internet? Or
it was through the book. In the beginning, I was just searching for ways to get the book out to the public. And I had seen AlzAuthors, and I reached out to Jean Lee, and she was very interested in my story. She read it and said, "Love to have you." And so the book was part of the AlzAuthors, their weekly newsletter. And then maybe a year or so later, she reached out to me again and said, would I consider joining the management team? And I was just so honored. And I loved the mission of AlzAuthors, to raise awareness and also to put books in the hands of those who need them, and to offer, collections of books. It was all the kinds of things that I wanted and could not find. Thought, wow, how amazing to be on the other end and to be able to provide that for people.
Absolutely. And, we've said many times on this show, and we've, had the honor of interviewing AlzAuthors several times, and we're big supporters of the organization, and it's exactly what is needed. There's nothing like it out there that I'm aware of. And, the resources from, on June 7th, you guys had the virtual event with the, Daughters of Dementia, as well as the podcast. And then just the traveling library, the custom caregiver collections. The work that you're doing is so very needed. And, we just try to help share the word and get the word out as much as possible, because again, like you were in the early 90s, there's people out there looking everywhere to get that help and support. And it's not to discount the medical professionals or the doctors, but that's outside of their realm. They're not going to be telling families how to best get mom to bed or dad to bed at night if they're wandering, or, if they're not wanting to bathe. They're giving you a diagnosis and a prognosis. AlzAuthors is helping to give you the rest of the tools to make that caregiving journey not only easy on the loved one with the dementia, but for the caregiver who's going through it. I've said many times that there's no other profession or job like a family caregiver. It's not paid. Typically, you're raising a family still, and now having to care for a parent or a loved one. And you have the emotional and mental toll along with the physical. And you mentioned with your friends when you first were going through it with your mother, if one of your friends or people in your social circle haven't gone through this or experienced it, they can be an ear to listen or a shoulder to cry on, but they're not going to necessarily be able to appreciate what you're truly going through because it's unlike anything you will ever go through being a family caregiver. I don't know if you would agree with that, but
I totally agree. And I, first of all, just want to say thank you so much for your support, Lance. We
absolutely.
just so appreciate everything that you're doing at All Home Care Matters.
Thank you.
It's just been such a gift. And I was thinking as you were talking of how when my mom was sort of at the early stages of her disease, and I would see friends at the barn, and they would ask me, "How are you doing?" And my first reaction would be to say, "I'm doing terrible. I am just a mess. You know, my mom is in bad shape. I don't know what to do." And I realized quickly I could only say that maybe once or twice before my friends stopped asking or their eyes glazed over. And it just wasn't, the kind of conversation you can hold and keep your friends.
Right.
So to have resources where you can go and find the information and the support and the comfort that you need is just enormous.
Absolutely. And I've told this story several times, but it applies every time I tell it. One of our caregiver support groups that we facilitate, we had a middle-aged woman come in, and she was new to the group. And the second or third time she came, she was just very distraught. And so when it was her time to share, and of course it's always voluntary, you don't have to share, you can just sit and listen. She just said, my best friend since childhood basically just stopped our friendship. And so we asked, well, why is that? She said, well, when we got married, every Friday or Saturday, our husbands and I, we'd always go out on a couple's dinner, movie, date, concert, you name it, every weekend for years and years. And for the last 6 months, she would have to cancel. And she said, my friend finally said, well, if you don't have time for us anymore and you don't care about our friendship, just don't worry about any other, date nights with us. And, it's one of those situations you can see both sides of the story. And we explained to her, don't begrudge your friend. It may be hard to do, but don't begrudge her because she's fortunate in that she doesn't have to go through what you're going through. So she can't truly understand. And if she did understand, she wouldn't be taking that, attitude or approach with your friendship. So don't be mad at her, but maybe, write her a letter and just explain in detail what you're going through so that she still won't be able to fully understand, but maybe she'll be able to appreciate what it is that you're experiencing, or have her come over and spend a couple of hours with you and she can see for herself, because this particular woman, because they were in their early 60s, so fairly young, and
Yes.
she was trying to, one, protect her husband by not, sharing what she was going through with her friend, and at the same time, she was trying to protect her friend by, just canceling and not having to go out in public and embarrass her friend. And it was one of those situations where, you hate to see a friendship of, 40, 50 years, but again, she can't understand what you're going through because she hasn't been through it. And that's where, groups like AlzAuthors, where everybody associated with it have all gone through that journey in some shape, whether it's with a spouse or a parent or a loved one. In a caregiver support group, everybody there is a caregiver for a loved one. So, you have that commonality and you have that ability to relate to what other people are going through. But if you haven't gone through it, you can't experience it. I equate it to this a lot where, when you're expecting a child, everybody tells you how awesome it is and how great it is. And yeah, you get it's going to be great and it's going to be awesome. But until it happens, you don't truly know how great and how awesome it is because you haven't been through it before. It's very similar to being a caregiver for a loved one, especially with dementia. So they did mend that fence, but, that just shows no matter how close of a relationship you have with somebody and how many, life experiences you have shared together over 40, 50 years, when it comes to caring for a loved one, a parent or a spouse, other people, they'll be sympathetic to a point, but they can't be empathetic if they haven't experienced it. And, it's just, and it's one of those situations where, the more that, AlzAuthors and All Home Care Matters and all these wonderful organizations can just help raise awareness, share stories like yours and your mom, hopefully whether a loved one is experiencing dementia or caring for a loved one, even if they just want to listen to learn about it, it will help raise awareness and give them a better understanding. So whether it's them or one of their friends that are going to go through it, when that time comes, it's not going to solve it. It's not going to necessarily make it a lot easier, but hopefully it'll make it a little smoother for that journey. Because as you know, I always say when you see one person with dementia, you've really only seen one person, because you could have two people both with dementia and they could have entirely different experiences.
Exactly. And just to add on to what you're saying,
Yeah.
one of the tips that I would also suggest is ask for help and maybe give specific examples. Maybe it's, could you spend 30 minutes with my loved one while I run to the store? Or would you mind picking up something while you're at the store? And something specific so that you can at least give them the opportunity, these friends, to take part in what you're experiencing. Because I totally agree, they are not going to get it if they haven't experienced it themselves.
Right. And just to add to that, and I was thinking as you were mentioning that, one of the challenges we find with families, and it's very common, is when they're, and you didn't have this experience, but when there's siblings or other family involved and they're not close by and they don't see the day to day that, the local relatives or loved ones may see, they have a phone call with that loved one who, the daughter's saying, to her brother, mom's really bad or dad's really bad, and this is what's happening. And so they say, well, I'll check on mom or I'll check on dad. And then they call and they have that superficial phone call. How you doing today? I'm good. Then they come back to their sibling, their brother or sister, and say, I talked to mom. She's fine. Maybe she was just having a bad day. I think that is a serious issue that a lot of families encounter, because, you have one section that is saying, look, this is what's going on. We need help. But then the ones that may not live close by or can't stop in person, they're not experiencing the same thing that the people locally are experiencing. So it's harder to get that buy-in of help and support. And that's a difficult issue that families do encounter. So I like when you say, if you ask for help, have them come by if at all possible,
Yes.
because you need that support as the caregiver as much as the loved one does, because again, you're sacrificing and doing a lot to help them. And sometimes you're sacrificing your own needs and your own care and your own health, and, jobs and other responsibilities don't stop when a loved one needs help.
Absolutely. And it's hard to ask for help. I mean,
Right.
you have to put your ego aside and just put it out there. And I mean, I feel for my sister because she had to ask for help. And it took me a little while to get on board and realize, oh my goodness, once I was down there and visiting with my mom for a week, I knew, like, oh, this is what she's been dealing with. And it's tough.
Right. Absolutely. So, Anne, I want to leave our listeners and viewers with this last question. If someone was to ask you how your caregiving journey changed you as a person, how would you respond to that?
Well, I would like to say, and my mom would appreciate this given what I shared earlier, I'd like to say that I have become a more compassionate person. But maybe beyond that, I think I have gained a greater perspective in life. I'm no longer just focused on my little personal journey. I've become aware that really there are so many challenges that each of us face in life. And if we can help somebody else out and be a blessing to them, that is a huge gift. And if we can step into the shoes of whoever is suffering, and not to say everyone with Alzheimer's is suffering, because many of them are not, but they may be struggling in some ways. And if we can reach out to them, that we really expand our own hearts as we do that. And I do feel like my heart was broken and mended and broken and mended, and hopefully in that process has been expanded.
Absolutely. And I'll leave us with this. One of my favorite parables from the Bible is the Good Samaritan. And, if viewers and listeners aren't familiar with it, I recommend reading it, because basically it's the story of the man on the side of the road. And I'm just going to paraphrase. Two, wealthy men walk by him and look, and, they say, well, we can't help him. We'll get dirty. So they keep going. Another man comes by and, doesn't want to get near him. Finally, the third man, who becomes the Good Samaritan, stops and says, well, if I don't help him, who will? And that's kind of something we like to live by here at All Home Care Matters is, if we don't do our part to help, who's going to? Just like AlzAuthors, your experience and your journey is over caring for, your mom. But yet here you are being, an author, a director and manager of AlzAuthors, still trying to help these families, because if AlzAuthors isn't helping them, who is? And I think that's so true, because, in Australia right now, Alzheimer's and dementia is the leading cause of death in women, more than breast cancer, more than ovarian cancer, more than heart disease. And, if that trend continues, that could very easily become the United States. I think right now, and you might know this stat better off the top of your head than I do, I believe dementia is the third leading cause of death for women in the United States. And that number just keeps increasing higher and higher. And most doctors' offices and healthcare professionals still are only giving a diagnosis. They're not giving them the tips and the tools and the resources in their little caregiver toolbox to manage it once they get their loved one back home after that initial diagnosis, which, is really tragic. And I don't blame the doctors or the healthcare professionals, but it's just a little outside their realm of what their role is. And so, any information that people can get, the resources and help. And like you said, one of the biggest things we tell families, when people offer to help, accept the help, but be specific in what you ask them to help you with. If they say, can I do anything? Say, yes, that would be great. And then tell them what they can do.
Yes.
People are very generous and they're very kind, and they will help if they offer. Take advantage of that, because at some point you're going to need that support, because it is a full-time job.
Yes, and people do need to know what to do, because if they haven't been through it, they have no clue.
Right. They don't know. And, and you can attest to this, every day can be different. Very often are 2 days the same. And, life does continue. Appointments and responsibilities don't stop. And, but that loved one still needs the help. But again, if you're the caregiver for your loved one, you have to take care of yourself, because if something happens to you, as it's, the saying goes, what happens to your loved one? So I just commend you. I commend your work you're doing with AlzAuthors, and I recommend everybody get your book. Like I said, it voted the best Alzheimer's book of all time, which, is just kudos to you and, what you went through and all the wonderful work that is coming from, your experience as a caregiver for your mother.
Thank you so much, Lance. And we are just so grateful for all you're doing. And
it's our pleasure.
You're spreading word and, raising awareness every day.
Yes. Well, anytime we can help you guys, we are more than happy to do it, and we would love to do it. And like I said, we just can't commend the wonderful work that you and AlzAuthors are doing. It's so needed. We've been big supporters of AlzAuthors going back years before there was ever All Home Care Matters, and we'll continue to support the work you guys are doing. And it's just a testament to what remarkable people you all are.
Thank you. That means the world. And we just send all that love right back to you.
Well, thank you, Ann. And we'll look forward to speaking to you again in the future.
Sounds great.
All right.
Thanks.
Thank you, Ann. Have a good day.
You too.
Thank you for joining us today here at All Home Care Matters. All Home Care Matters is here to help families as they navigate these long-term care issues. We invite you to visit us at allhomecarematters.com, where there's a private, secure, fillable form where you can give us feedback, show ideas, or if you have questions. Every form is read and responded to. And remember, you can listen to the show on any of your favorite podcast streaming platforms or watch the show on our official YouTube channel. Just make sure to hit that subscribe button so that you never miss an episode. We'd also, again, like to thank Ann Campanella for joining us here today. Thank you so much, and we look forward to seeing you again here at All Home Care Matters.
Thank you for joining us today. We look forward to you joining us again on another episode of All Home Care Matters. To learn more about the show and to connect with us, visit us at allhomecarematters.com.